We created a figure based on the style of Henry Moore from clay, and now we are going to create a drawing of that figure in a public location to think about how art works in public spaces. And to do that, I've selected a location that makes sense with the content of my piece. It's a calm, reflective piece, so it's in a calm, reflective space. And the first step that I'm going to do is take a sheet of paper, and I can place the papers over a window to act as kind of a light box type thing. But for right now, I'm just going to trace right over top of the image on the table the main details. You don't need every brick of the building, and you don't need every branch. You just want to get the main things like where the windows are, the scale of the windows, the placement of the ground, and the placement of the major landscape features such as the trees. So now I can see here that this area right here is the area that my sculpture is going to need to be in. So I want to think about size. If my tree is here is about a 1/2 inch big, and in real life is about 1 foot big, then I can make a simple ratio and say that my sculpture should be a little bigger than human size. So I want to make a space here that's about 3 inches by 3 inches, so that my sculpture would be 6 feet high by 6 feet wide. And then I also want to think about the depth, and my sculpture should be about 1 inch deep on my sketch, so that in real life it would be about 2 feet. So now that I know how big my sculpture is going to be, I want to start thinking about how to draw my sculpture. And I want to start by looking for the basic shapes. So I'm going to start looking at the oval of the head. I'm going to look for the cylinder shape of the neck, the oval of the body. You notice I'm drawing quick gesture-like lines instead of trying to get the figure perfect the first time. Drawing kind of ovals for the arms, ovals for the top of the leg, the bottom of the leg, and the foot. And I'm making sure that it's all contained within the 3 inch by 3 inch by 1 inch space that I've determined. So now that I have all the ovals in place for the figure, I want to think about a base. And for my sculpture, I want it to have a low base so it's lifted off the ground, but I don't want it to be up really high that it's going to seem too much above the everyday person. So I'm going to make a low rectangle here in the front, and then I'm going to make a point here in the back at the center of the piece since I'm looking straight on, and I'm going to have lines going back to that point that are going to angle inwards to show the rectangular base block at a proper perspective. Now I'm going to show that separately as well, since that can be a little confusing. So if we're drawing a basic rectangle in 3 dimensions, what we would start with is the rectangle. And then when you think about the horizon line, and we'd put a vanishing point on the horizon line, and then lines would go back to that vanishing point. And then parallel to the top of the block, we would draw the cutoff point for the block. So here is the top of that base or block, and here is the side. Now if we want to do a slightly different angle on our piece, we can make a rectangle base again, a horizon line, a vanishing point off to the side, a line from each corner up to the vanishing point, and then again a parallel line to cut off the form. And then we would have the top of our base, the side of our base, and the front of our base. So going back to our form now, we have the form completely drawn out to the size and scale that we want it to be. We can go back and we can soften some of the lines if we drew really dark, or if you drew really light, you can go back and make some of the lines darker so that the form is visible. Now we want to start adding color to our form. So my form, I've determined, is going to be made out of cast bronze. You could pick marble or plaster or colored metal, but this is going to be cast bronze. So I'm going to start laying in some orange highlight tones, and every tone I put in is going to wrap around the form, following the form. So this circular cylinder neck is going to have curved lines, and the curves are going to follow along on this oval head as well. I'm leaving open a highlight. I'm using the side of the pencil to get nice soft tones. So now that I have that bright orange on, I'm going to go back and I'm going to work with some browns. And I'm going to again make sure that every mark follows the curve. If something's underneath, like this area here is underneath the arm, I'm going to make it a little darker by pressing harder. And if it's a light area, I'm again going to leave some white highlights. So now that I have the brown on, I want to go back and make some darker tones. I don't want to use black because black will create kind of a dead space, a dead area. So I'm going to use some blue, which is a great undertone because it has a nice cool feeling to it, just like you would feel in a shadow. So I'm going to go back with the blue color pencils, and these are just regular Crayola color pencils. And I'm going to create a linear shadow underneath the form to really separate it from the base. And the base doesn't look quite big enough, so I'm just going to bring it up a little bit here. Make it just a little bigger over to the side here, so that the form really looks like it's sitting on it. I can go back with the brown over top of the blue to blend it in, just using the point to get a strong color, using the side to blend more. I want to use the blue again in the shadows. Now if you want your form to stand out more, you can also use a black Sharpie to outline your form. Make sure that you don't cross over the form in the wrong spots. So if you have the back arm back here, make sure that you don't draw the back arm coming out of the center of the chest. So I want to divide here the chest from that back arm as I outline the form. So make nice clean lines to outline your form, and that can help to define those different areas. And then when you're done outlining your form and you're done adding your tones, you can cut the form out using an X-Acto so you can get nice clean negative space. So the first thing you want to do is place something to protect the table. So we're just going to use here a catalog. When you're using the X-Acto, you want to make sure that the blade is in properly. So you want to place it in and tighten. And then you want to keep your hand away from the blade as you make smooth, clean cuts. You want to press hard enough that it's cutting cleanly through the paper, but not so hard that you're kind of gouging at the paper. And then you want to carefully separate it from the background paper without ripping it. So just very gently pick it up out of the paper. And if there's any spots where it's stuck, just cut those too. You want to cut out the negative space. And then you're ready to apply the picture to your background. So the first thing that I'm going to do is look at its placement and think about where it would go. So if I place this way back here at the horizon line, it looks way too large for the space. But if I bring it down closer to the front, it seems to fit the space much better. So I'm going to be placing it near the front, so it's the proper scale for the space. I'm going to use just regular Elmer's glue and put a few dots around this outside. And then I'm going to use my finger just to smooth the glue gently towards the edges so all the edges are completely covered. And then I'm going to press the image at the bottom and gently smooth up from the bottom so that I don't get any glue on the top surface and so that the image is completely secure. So now that my regular view is done, I want to show this from an alternate view. So I'm going to take a new sheet of paper and I'm going to look at my sculpture as I do the alternate view. It's the best way to get really a realistic drawing of your form. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for those basic shapes. So what I want to do is I want to think about what shapes I'm seeing. So right away I'm seeing the circle of the head. And then I'm seeing the shoulders. And from there the arms and the hands. And I'm breaking the whole form down as I'm going into oval shapes in a type of quick gesture drawing to capture the whole form quickly. So I'm capturing the circles of the knees, the square type body, and then off to the top here, the feet. So now that the whole form's captured, what I want to think about now is the base that it's on. So I have my sculpture on a base. If yours is not on a base, you might just want to draw some grass texture around it or some rock texture around it, whatever that it would be placed on. But mine has a base, so I'm just going to draw a rectangular space, and now I'm ready to start the tones. And just like before, I want to start with my orange, and I'm going to move in the direction of the object. I'm going to think about where the light is hitting the object. So things that are underneath are going to be much darker. So I'm going to push harder and use darker tones in those spots. Spots that are raised up and closer to me are going to be much lighter. And so those areas are not going to have a lot of tone. They're going to have some white highlights on them. So again, every mark that I make is going to follow the direction of the form. Using the side of my pencil so I can soften up the tone instead of having harsh lines as I move towards those lighter areas. Okay, now I'm going to work in with the brown. And on areas like the head that are lighter, I'm not going to put as much. But I'm going to blend out the edges so that there's not a lot of orange left, so that it's just a light brown with that orange undertone. So I want to get the brown pretty much everywhere except for the highlights. Now when you color the background, you don't want to color in a bunch of different directions. You want to color in one direction so it has a nice, even, smooth texture to it. So I'm coloring the base now just in one up and down motion. And now I'm ready to put in some blue tones. And again, as I said before, we don't use the black because it would just deaden the area. So I'm going to use the blue tones instead. And I'm going to use the colored pencil very softly, using the side of it at first. And then to get some more definite tones, I can use the tip of it to create more of a strong outline, separation, shadow around the parts of the form that I really want to have pop out. You can also, as we did in the other form, outline the form to separate it more. So I'm going to go back with the orange now to just smooth out some of my tones and make the highlight on the knees a little bit smaller since they are underneath the hands. I make the hands a little bit brighter orange since they are up close and can be more of a highlight. And I'm going to go through with the Sharpie to outline and separate some areas. Make sure to really think about what you're outlining so that you get the lines in the proper places. And now I'm ready to cut this form out. When I cut the form out, and when I cut out all of my separate parts of the proposal, I want to leave an equal white space around them. So I have a clean white border that helps them stand off of the color border. Now, if you have a plain white background, then you might want to cut right up to the color border. And now you're ready to collect the different sections of your proposal and arrange them so that there is a nice empty negative space around the outside and an equal negative space around the images. And you can see that there's included the full space with the sculpture from a side view, a label tag with measurements based on the ratio that we talked about, a picture of what it looked like before any sculpture was added, a detail such as these lights that are solar powered to light the sculpture, and then the image here of the sculpture from a different view. So that concludes our instructional video on drawing about public sculpture, and I'm looking forward to what you do for this project.